think we may be onto something. No? Why didn't I join?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I was so blessed. Weren't you blessed? Yes, I was blessed. Yes, I was blessed too. And it's fun to sit back there and see, I normally don't get to sit with my family. I don't know if you ever noticed this or not, but there's no Mrs. Austin next to me most weeks. I'm always alone. So today, I mean, I could have come up here and sung, right? Could have. But my daughter came up and sat next to me. I mean, that never happens. So it was like, oh my gosh, this is really cool. So, you know, and the guys didn't need me. Did they need me? They didn't need me. I mean, Holden was really rocking along. I thought, whoa, I mean, this is an untapped talent, you know? This is dangerous too, when the pastor sees somebody do something like that, they think, oh my gosh, there are all these possibilities that went running through my mind. And Ishmael too. Maybe they could do a duet. I do have good news for you. You know, several weeks ago, someone was here and they wanted a tour of the building. And so I gave them a tour. And Jack was kind enough to unlock the gate or give me the code so I can unlock it. And I took this person out there. First, I said, everything you see, my line is, everything you see is all paid for. So the church, one of my goals as pastor was not to leave the church, not that I'm leaving, but that the church would not have a 20 or 30-year loan. And so the person said, so you're not going to get a loan? I said, well, there's a variety of reasons, but we're not. But they said, we're building the building in faith. The person said, wow, that's really cool. Well, I got an email from that person this week. And ladies and gentlemen, that person wants to do $35,150. And you heard that right, $35,150. And I wrote him back and I said, bless your heart, wow. You know, and so that money is going to be coming in, and so it will enable us to take some more steps forward because of it. So thank the Lord for, again, God is touching hearts in ways in which we don't always see or don't always understand. You know, and I thought it was interesting at the time when we were out there. He said specifically, you're not getting a loan, you're not putting the church in bondage with a loan, no. And he wrote and said, that's one of the reasons I want to give, because you're doing it step by step in faith. So, today is Father's Day, so to all the dads out there, and to the moms, happy Father's Day. You may have never heard the name Sonora Smart Dodd. Sonora Smart Dodd lived in Spokane, Washington, and attended church there in the early part of the 20th century. She was in church one day when she heard a Mother's Day message given by the pastor of her local church. And she sat there and she said, or thought, wonder why there's nothing for Father's Day. After all, her father, who had been a Civil War veteran, raised her and her 5 siblings, so 6 kids all alone because their mother had died in childbirth. And so she got this idea in 1909 and thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. And so the first Father's Day came about in June, actually on June the 19th, 1910, because June was the month her father was born in. And so she inaugurated Father's Day. So that's why we have a Father's Day in June and a Mother's Day in May. Well, President Coolidge in 1924, 100 years ago, gave his support to a Father's Day. You know, don't remember Silent Cow, he didn't say much. The joke was one woman said, I bet I can get you to say more than 3 words. And President Coolidge looked at her and said, you lose. So, you know, not much for that. But it was not until 1966 that President Lyndon Johnson issued a proclamation that recognized this day. And it wasn't until 1972 when President Nixon signed a legislation making it a holiday. I mean, you probably didn't know that. And so there's been quite a bit of time since Sonora first thought of and first, you know, gave any kind of validity to a Father's Day and seeing it established. So a lot of things are important to dad. You know, it's important dad provide a home, dad provide this, dad provide that. The greatest thing that dads can do, the greatest investment and the greatest influence that a dad can have is through his children, if he's been so fortunate to have any. You know, to be able to have influence in their lives, watch them and see them grow up. Every year about this time, you know, on Facebook, everybody puts down pictures of their little darlings when they were going to that first day of first grade, and now they're graduating from high school, and they wonder, where in the world did all the time go? How could I blink and suddenly these little kids that needed me for everything are driving cars, and they're doing this, and they've got jobs, and you see that how quickly, you know, time really does pass along. And you think about the shortness of time in which to have that influence in your child's life. And it's important that dads do that. And I think a lot of times influence can be seen through something called boundaries. It says in Psalm 19:7, the law of the Lord is perfect. It restores the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure. It makes wise the simple. There's a boundary there. There's a boundary there. If a dad's doing his job right, then his kids are going to trust in the Lord with all their heart and not lean on their own understanding. If the dad's doing his job right, he's going to realize that part of it is getting their children to see that God is going to supply at every turn in their children's lives. And if the dad's doing his job right, he realizes that the law of the Lord is going to restore the soul, and the testimony of the Lord is going to make wise the simple. So the things that God does and the things God teaches dad, he in turn turns around and teaches his children to rest and trust in the Lord. Out of the law of the Lord, Jesus said the whole thing hangs on two things. One, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, those 365 days a year, 24/7, you love God. And second, you love your neighbor as you love yourself. Not everybody looks like you, thinks like you, votes like you, or anything else, but you still love them because that's what God says he wants you to do. Those provide the right kind of boundaries. God's laws, God's precepts are always right. In Psalm 19:8, the precepts of the Lord are right. They rejoice the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure. It enlightens the eyes. And so you realize as you study God's word, as you look at it, and as you understand it, that, you know, there's an opportunity for you to learn, because as you learn more about God, it does rejoice your heart, and it does make it possible to walk and live as God would have you to live, and there's a lot of freedom there. And the commandments of the Lord are not burdensome, but they're just the opposite. They help you to see what God is doing. They help you to understand what direction to go. And God's awe endures in Psalm 19:9. The fear of the Lord is clean. It endures forever. The judgments of the Lord are true. They are righteous altogether. And so through those three verses in Psalm 19, we see that there's a sense of accountability. God keeps dads accountable, because you've got these little people who look at you and who see what you're doing, and then they're going to model and they're going to emulate who you are. You know, they may deviate from time to time, but still the foundation has been laid, and you can look at this and you can say, wow, there's accountability. And the second thing, which is very important, is it keeps us from sin. If we are focused on the Lord and understand that his law is perfect, if we acknowledge the Lord and know that his precepts are right, and if we have an awe, a reverence, a fear of the Lord, it keeps us from sin, because God is always at the forefront of our thinking. And so we don't go out and do things that would make God's heart unhappy or hurt God in any way, shape, or form. Now, if it's seen through boundaries, it can also be seen through direction. In Proverbs 11:3, the integrity of the upright will guide them, but the crookedness of the treacherous will destroy them. And oftentimes when you're self-focused and only interested in what benefits you, history is littered with people who think, hey, I can do this, I can get away with it. And I can recite names, I've got them right here in front of me, but I'm not going to, because you can think of people over time who have been great disappointments in how they've handled situations and circumstances, because they thought of themselves before they thought of God. And so the integrity of the upright will guide them, but the crookedness of the treacherous will destroy them. Nothing is more unhappy or more sad than seeing people who had such great promise not finish well. Seeing people who had supposedly the world by the tail, so to speak, and see them just fall completely apart to the point where you just shake your head and go, what in the world happened to you? What did you do? What happened to you? Why did you go that route? Oftentimes you look back in their past and you can see that they didn't have the right kind of role model. Proverbs 13:6 says, righteousness guards the one whose way is blameless, but wickedness subverts the sinner. So righteousness is going to guard the one whose way is blameless. Righteousness comes from an ongoing, vibrant relationship with God. You do that through Bible study, you do it through prayer, you do it through ministry, you do it through caring for other people more than you care for yourself. And so righteousness is something that emanates from inside of you and is visible to those people around you. If you have a direction of righteousness, then you can see what God is doing in each and every situation and circumstance, and you can tell your family, hey, God has got this under control. God has not brought us this far to leave us by the roadside and not have us be successful. Now, Alan Simpson said this, because the opposite of righteousness is what I would call hatred. And to understand this, Alan Simpson at the funeral of President George H.W. Bush said this, and I've never forgotten it since I heard it in 2018. Hatred always corrodes the container it is carried in. Ooh, wow, you know? Even the people who were broadcasting that funeral said, I grabbed for a pencil and a piece of paper. I want to write that down. We don't always understand that what we carry around inside of us could actually act like a cancer, and as such could destroy us. And when Simpson said that at that funeral, I thought, wow, I've never heard anything so profound in my life. Hatred always corrodes the container it's carried in. If you're hateful towards your fellow man, that's not righteousness at all. That's not righteousness at all. And so finally, Proverbs 9:10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. And so what does that mean? That means that you have reverence, you have awe, you have respect for God. And it is the beginning of wisdom because God knows more than you do. As it says in the book of James, you lack wisdom, ask God. He's going to give to you immeasurably. I often write to people and say, hey, I'm praying that the Lord gives you wisdom, discernment, and insight, because you've got decisions to make, and you need to rely upon Him and realize that He is going to bring this event, this moment in your life, to a perfect conclusion. It may not be the conclusion you want, but it'll still be a perfect conclusion. And so you start with a healthy sense of awe, respect for God, because that's the beginning of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. When you understand God and His purposes in your life, you're going to begin to see there's a sequence here. There is an ongoing movement here. And wow, I missed that. How did I miss that? And God shows you, hey, I've got everything under control. And you never know how God's working. As I shared with you about the $35,150 that this individual wants to give anonymously, you know, only God can do that. Only God can do that. And if He can do that, imagine what insight He can give you when you lean upon Him. Things are best taught which are modeled, and so the biggest teacher at home is mom and dad. You know, when I used to coach soccer, who is it the kids always looked at when they scored a goal? It was never me. It was always mom and dad. Mom and dad, did you see me? Mom and dad, did you notice what I did? Mom and dad, mom and dad, mom and dad. Because kids want to please mom and dad. They want mom and dad to be proud of them. They want mom and dad to jump up and down with excitement. But if you expect your child to model integrity, then you got to do it first. If you expect your child to model righteousness, then you have to do it first. And if you expect your child to model reverence, then you've got to do it first. So there's boundaries, and there's direction, and finally there's counsel. In Psalm 27, verse 1, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread? These are rhetorical questions. There's no one, because God is greater than anything or anybody. And the Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread? Nobody, because God is greater than everything. The Lord is with me in Romans 8:31, my favorite verse all time. You know, if I died before Jan's got to have a headstone that says Chuck Austin. It's got to say, if God is for us, who is against us? Romans 8:31. I love that verse. I love that verse. Life is full of ups and downs. Life is not a bed of roses, and it isn't 72 degrees all the time. God is, and our lives are not strewn with rose petals and all this kind of stuff. Life has highs and life has lows. But if God is for us, who can be against us? Who better to model and demonstrate that than God himself? And finally, we have to follow God. Micah 6:8, he has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. What does the Lord require of you? Do justice. Be a person who is upright. To love kindness. We don't live in a kind society. Don't know if you've noticed that or not. Just lots of stuff out there. I wish people were more kind to one another. But oftentimes, we can be bigoted or we can be racist or whatever. Kids learn from their dads. You know, this is how you act. Love kindness and to walk humbly with God, because you know what? God knows more than you do. Influence, though. Influence is what, you know, a dad would like to have. And so I want to close with this illustration that I've used before once, and I had a difficult time getting through it without crying. Because the influence that you can have can sometimes be so minor, or what you think is minor, and yet yields great dividends to those people that you come in contact with. And so there's a story told many years ago of an elementary teacher. Her name was Mrs. Thompson. And she stood in front of her 5th grade class on the very first day of school. She told the children what they must have thought was a lie. Like most teachers, she looked at her students and said that she loved them all the same. But that was impossible, because there in the front row, slumped in his seat, was a little boy named Teddy Stoddard. Mrs. Thompson had watched Teddy the year before and noticed that he didn't play well with the other children, that his clothes were messy, and that he constantly needed a bath. And Teddy could be unpleasant. It got to the point where Mrs. Thompson would actually take delight in marking his papers with a broad red pen, making bold X's, and then putting a big F at the top of his papers. Now, at the school where Mrs. Thompson taught, she was required to review each child's past records, and she puts Teddy Stoddard's off until last. These are called cume folders, and they travel with you. Whatever school you go to, that cume folder goes with you. And so teachers can go back and look at what other teachers wrote, what was your progress, and all this stuff. So Mrs. Stoddard put that off until last, and so she noticed that the 1st grade teacher wrote, Teddy is a bright child with a ready laugh. He does his work neatly and has good manners. He's a joy to be around. His 2nd grade teacher wrote, Teddy Stoddard is an excellent student, well liked by his classmates, but he's troubled because his mother has a terminal illness, and life at home must be a struggle. His 3rd grade teacher wrote, his mother's death has been hard on him. He tries to do his best, but his father doesn't show much interest, and his home life will soon affect him if some steps aren't taken. Teddy's 4th grade teacher wrote, Teddy Stoddard is withdrawn, doesn't show much interest in school, he doesn't have many friends, and sometimes sleeps in class. By now, Mrs. Thompson realized the problem, and she was ashamed of herself. She felt even worse when her students brought her Christmas presents wrapped in beautiful ribbons and bright paper, except for Teddy's. His present was clumsily wrapped in a heavy brown paper bag that he must have gotten from the grocery store. Mrs. Thompson took pains to open it in the middle of the other presents and students. And some of the children started to laugh when she found a rhinestone bracelet with some of the stones missing, and a bottle that was 1/4 full of perfume. But she stifled the children's laughter when she exclaimed how pretty the bracelet was. She put it on and dabbed some of the perfume on her wrist. Teddy Stoddard stayed after school that day just long enough to say, Mrs. Thompson, today you smell just like my mom used to. After the children left, she cried for at least an hour. And on that very day, she quit teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. Instead, she began to teach children. Mrs. Thompson paid particular attention to Teddy. As she worked with him, his mind seemed to come alive. The more she encouraged him, the faster he responded. And by the end of the year, Teddy had become one of the brightest children in the class. And despite her lie that she would love all her children the same, Teddy Stoddard became one of her pets. A year later, she found a note under her door. It was from Teddy telling her that she was still the best teacher he had ever had in his whole life. 6 years went by before she got another note from Teddy. He then wrote that he had finished high school, third in his class, and she was still the best teacher he had ever had in his whole life. 4 years after that, she got another letter saying that while things had been tough at times, he stayed in school and stuck with it and would soon graduate from college with the highest of honors. He assured Mrs. Thompson that she was still the best and favorite teacher he had ever had in his whole life. Then 4 more years passed and yet another letter came. This time he explained that after he got his bachelor's degree, he decided to go a little further. The letter explained that she was still the best and favorite teacher he'd ever had, but now his name was a little longer because the letter was signed Theodore S. Stoddard, M.D. The story doesn't end there. You see, there was another letter that spring. Teddy said he'd met this girl and was going to be married, and he explained that his father had died a couple of years ago, and he was wondering if Mrs. Thompson might agree to sit in the place of the wedding you usually reserve for the mother of the groom. And of course, Mrs. Thompson did. And guess what? She wore the bracelet, the one with several rhinestones missing, and she made sure she was wearing the perfume that Teddy remembered his mother wearing on that last Christmas. They hugged each other, and Dr. Stoddard whispered in Mrs. Thompson's ear, "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, for believing in me. Thank you so much for making me feel important and showing me that I could make a difference." Mrs. Thompson, with tears in her eyes, whispered back, "Teddy, you have it all wrong. You were the one who taught me that I could make a difference. I didn't know how to teach until I met you." Every mom and dad wants to have influence. And sometimes it's so simple as wearing a rhinestone bracelet and putting a dab of perfume on your wrist. That never left Taylor. And so you always want to be an encouragement to your child or children. Each one is different. Each one is unique. But all of us dads and moms will give our eye teeth to have that kind of influence. Make sure it is based in your relationship with God and in you making time. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you for the opportunity today of looking at your word, both Old Testament and New, and realizing afresh that you desire us to be in the best relationship with you we can be. And help us to be great dads who have influence. Influence that resonates with our children. Influence that resonates with others. May we profit from our time spent with you so that in turn we can be the best dad possible. And I just